Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to Social Value Matters 2020, our first ever online global conference. This year, Social Value International have been thrilled to work with Social Value Canada to bring you this incredible conference over 5 days. We hope that you've enjoyed both the Leadership Summits and the Practitioner Summits and have found them all interesting so far. Please note that the session today has been pre-recorded by the fantastic speakers that we have. You can enjoy watching this session, and below on the screen further down, there is a question box where you can ask questions. Please note that due to time differences, speakers will not always be able to answer your questions straight away, but please do check back because they will get back to you as soon as possible. Now, without further ado, we'll start today's session. I do hope you enjoyed the session and hope to see you soon at another one of our sessions. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our SVM2020 session, bringing change from the inside. Before I go into detail to what we're going to be talking about today, I want to quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Simon Oberman. I'm the co-founder and COO of Artemis Impact. And today I will be joined by Noah Oberman, my brother, who is the co-founder and head of product of Artemis Impact. And together, we're going to be sharing with you guys a few insights on how to involve communities into your project creation. Now, the session objective for today is to deep dive into that into this problem. But first, let's have a think, because we know that organizations often face resistances from communities when running interventions. Sometimes this resistance is by the same people for whom they are trying to create an impact for. Plenty of reasons for this resistance by people. It could be social, could be financial, could be psychological. However, one of the main reasons seen in our experience is that most organizations try to bring too much change just from the outside. Very much top down, as we will see. And in doing so, they can alienate the very people that they're trying to create positive value for. So how can organizations overcome these resistances? Well, today, that's exactly what we would like to discuss. How organizations can build a more two-way relationship with communities. Why is it important to do that? What are the pitfalls? How to involve these communities in all three stages of the design and the execution and the M&E process, and how to engage donors in projects driven by these communities. Now, for us in this topic, bringing change from the inside and how community-driven movements can create more impact, the specific agenda that we have for today is that first, we're going to be talking about what are top-down approaches to community projects. Then we're going to be talking about what are bottom-up approaches to community projects. Then we're going to look at the need for collaborative approaches, which is a bit of a hybrid solution. Then we're going to be looking at how we can involve communities, the do's and the don'ts, and specific examples. And before we conclude, we're going to have a few examples of what to look out for and a couple of nifty tips that in our experience have helped us out in this type of collaborative approach to get where we want to go. So to start off, I would like to hand over to my brother Noah.
Thank you, Simon, for the introduction. And as you mentioned before, everybody, we're going to be starting with top-down approach. As you can see here on the slide, on the left-hand side, we see a diagram representing the top-down approach. At the top, we see the resources and everything that the method brings to the community, such as solution, resources, method, and specific impact metrics and indicators that they find important. Now, the top-down approach is interesting because it is, as you say, the outside organization coming into the community to enact change. Now, this is often used because it is a low-hanging fruit solution and it is easy to implement, because with a top-down approach, you are not customizing the solution to the specific circumstances and the situation that you're trying to change. Now, as we mentioned before, traditional approach to community development projects has been top-down so far. There are, however, a couple of caveats that come with using the top-down approach. We have a couple of them outlined right here. So the arguments against the top-down approach are, firstly, that it can come across quite authoritative and dogmatic to the community that you're trying to enact change in, especially if there hasn't been a lot of contact between the outside organization and the community beforehand. Secondly, it often does not lead to relevant solutions. There's often a misdiagnosis, so to say, of the actual problem. Thirdly, it does not lead to sustainable results. Often in a top-down approach, when an outside organization comes to a community, and then they eventually leave the community, the solutions that they've tried to implement or the positive impact that they've tried to enact doesn't last beyond the stay that they are there. At the same time, often with a top-down approach, it does not create a community ownership, meaning that the community does not feel empowered or that they are part of the solution that the outside organization is trying to enact. Often, this all put together, a top-down approach creates a one-way relationship where the outside organizer or the outside project is a service giver to alleviate often a misdiagnosed problem in the wrong way, and doesn't even last that long. Yep. So we'll go on to the next slide. What we'll be doing now is going over 2 real-life examples. We'll be omitting their name for privacy purposes, but we'll be describing how they have used a top-down approach and where they have fallen short to reaching their goal outcome, despite their well-intended effort. The first example we're going to be talking about, we'll call it Social Enterprise X. So for Social Enterprise X, what we're trying to show is that non-participatory nature of the top-down approach can lead to unsuitable and short-term solutions. Now, the intention of Project X, of this project, was when the organization observed that a high number of children in South America grew up without shoes and faced severe hardships. So the founder, when he saw that, proposed as a solution that they offer free shoes to the children as a means to alleviate the hardships that the children were facing. The goal outcome that they have intended was to alleviate the conditions and decrease the hardships overall by providing the shoes, of course. Now, this project went on for a couple of years. And then after a couple of years, an external audit and researcher wanted to see if the project was actually creating and enacting change and was effective in alleviating the hardships faced by these children. Now, what the researchers found was the kids liked the shoes and used it for outdoor activities. Up to 77% of the children wore them at least 3 times per week. However, other findings showed that despite the best efforts and best intentions of this project, there were a couple of negative outcomes in conclusion of this project. Little improvement was made in school attendance. I think the number is, as I can see here, 0.16 of a day. And self-esteem was actually, and little improvement was made for self-esteem for the children too. There was actually an overall average reduction in the time spent on homework and academics because, as you can tell, the kids were playing outside with the new shoes that they received. And I think the most detrimental thing as an outcome of this project is that the attitude of the children became that they always expected other people to solve their problems for them, which was also an unintended outcome despite the best intention and efforts of this project. So we can see here how a top-down approach even with the most effort and intention was not able to fulfill their goal outcome and fell short a little bit too. In the next slide, we're going to be going over the main reason why the project did not reach its intended outcome. There can be a myriad of reasons why a project fail is a strong word, but fall short to their goal. And the one we're outlining today is that this project had an inadequate needs assessment, which is a crucial step before the project even begins to outline what really is the core problem that's causing these symptoms. We're going to be outlining that in 4 points. First point is that the solutions that were proposed and implemented were based on outsider assumptions and biases, right? The founder came into the situation, into the community, and misdiagnosed based on his or her biases what the best solution is to the situation. Second point, little attempt was made to actually understand the community's underlying problems beyond the symptoms that were exposed to the founder. Thirdly, children's issues were taken in isolation from the community's socioeconomic conditions, meaning that the facing hardships and not having shoes was a symptom of the socioeconomic situation, which is based on other problems that are all somewhat interlinked in the community. Meaning that if you solve a symptom of a problem, then you're not solving the problem, you're perpetuating it in some sense because you're just alleviating the symptom. The last point to outline the inadequate needs assessment is that people from the community or the local authorities were not involved during any phase. Because if the people from the local community were involved at the beginning, at the analysis stage, they could have immediately told the founder or the project or the organization that providing shoes to the children might make the children happy, but it wouldn't get to the core root of the problem, which would have structurally changed the project as a whole. So here we can see how with an inadequate needs assessment, the project is doomed to fall short already from the beginning. And we'll go to the next slide. So the next example, we'll call them Project Y. In this project, we're showing that lack of community involvement affects the longevity of a project outcome. So for Project Y, the intention was to drill wells and create boreholes worth up to $360 million US, which is an incredibly large amount for a project such as this in the sub-Saharan Africa area. The goal outcome for this project, was to give rural citizens access to clean water and sanitation facilities. Now, technically, with the amount of funding that was given and with the care that this was executed in, this project succeeded its goal outcome, meaning give rural citizens access to clean water and sanitation facilities. But unfortunately, what the goal outcome did not include was the longevity of this solution. So let's look at the results. An investigation found that the boreholes and wells were actually useless because they weren't really maintained. Only 1/3 of water points built by NGOs in Senegal in the region were actually working. And up to 58% of water points in northern Ghana were in disrepair. So as you can see here, even though technically on the books, in the notes, probably in the reports, the project was a success, if you actually look at the impact that the project did much, much later after the organization left, the impact did not last past the organization's stay there. So what is the main reason why this project did not reach its intended outcome? The main reason we're outlining here is that there was an inadequate skill building and inadequate knowledge transfer from the organization to the local community. And we're going to be outlining that within 4 points. The first point is that the water points were built without fully involving the local communities, meaning that already during the building stage, the project could have involved local communities to help build the wells to increase the skills that the community have. Secondly, community's ability to maintain the water points were not taken into account, meaning strategically from the get-go, the project did not think about the skill level of the local communities that were there. Thirdly, the local handover took place without any community skill building, meaning that after the organization tried to hand over the skill, the local wells to the communities didn't even have the correct skills or feel ownership over the solution that was handed to them. Lastly, the top-down approach provided a solution without providing enough resources for maintenance and continuous running. So in all, without having considered or including the intention of longevity in the goal outcome, projects such as these are bound to fail with a top-down approach, by not involving communities, by not increasing the skills of the communities and giving ownership, and not transferring the knowledge how to maintain the solution over a longer period of time. So we've talked about top-down a lot with what are the issues. Here are a couple of key examples. What we're going to be talking about now are the approaches to community projects, the grassroots projects, which is the response to people who have seen the inefficiencies of a top-down approach and are trying to come up with solutions on how to do it better. So here's the bottom-up approach. So in the bottom-up approach, on the diagram on the left, we can see that, so in the bottom-up approach on this slide on the left, when we look at the diagram, we can see that this approach brings other factors into play. The top-down approach brought strategy, know-how, resources, methodology, and metrics into play. And here we see that the bottom-up approach brings demand-driven actions, autonomous decision-making, and community resources into the picture. This comes from the issues that we've outlined before, that this bottom-up approach tackles the problems very differently. Now, you might think that the bottom-up approach is the answer to top-down, although when you look at it in implementation, there's actually also caveats that come with this side. And we've outlined 4 of them here on this slide. So the first one, lack of skills and technical know-how. Most bottom-up community-driven projects lack the skills to run the project effectively and efficiently. Secondly, lack of resources. Most bottom-up grassroots organizations or projects lack the resources to fully scale and really enact change to a meaningful level. Thirdly, failure to see the problem holistically. Unfortunately, as much as we think that people inside the community can come up with the best solutions to the core problem, it is often the case that the people inside who are living the problem often don't see the problem holistically and with a wider angle. They get the tunnel vision. Lastly, there's a lack of accountability. What happens when a lot of people inside the same community work together is that it's very difficult for the people inside the community to hold other people accountable to enact and enforce and effectively operate the project. Yeah. So bottom-up approach tries to tackle the inefficiencies, inaccuracies of a top-down, but comes up short on a couple of fronts that we've just outlined. So in all, now that we've talked about top-down, bottom-up, we come to this moment where we see, okay, we need a combination of both, which is what we call the collaborative approach. So the collaborative approach. Let's look at the diagram on the left real quick. we have our top-down approach, which is the top side of the diagram, that brings innovation and technology to the picture, plenty of resources, expertise, and supervision. When you have the bottom-up approach, what does it bring to the picture? It brings the accurate needs assessment of the problem. It brings the accurate problem assessment. It brings potential solutions on how to solve those problems from experience on the ground. It brings reporting measures from the people, by the people, and it brings a sense of ownership to the communities that you're actually trying to affect. So in all, this seems like an oversimplified way of saying you have one, you have the other, and a combination of two is the answer, and it kind of is so. But it is in the implementation actually where it gets a bit tricky. But if you do, and if you're able to make the collaborative approach work, then you can achieve three key things. You can co-develop relevant and sustainable solutions. You can create co-ownership among the community with the organization that's trying to enact change. And finally, you can create a two-way accountability between the community and external agencies so that the local community can keep the external organizations in check and keep them accountable to be doing the right thing. And then the organization, the outside organization, can keep the community in check to make sure that they're on track to effectively, continuously operate the project in a positive way. So with the collaborative approach, if you overcome the hurdles of implementation, you can create a scalable and a lot more impact for communities with that project. So let's look at an example of a collaborative approach. Call it Project Z. The Project Z is an Indonesian food security project. What we're trying to show, so the collaborative approach covers being able to give the target beneficiaries the right solution, measure the success of the project, and thereby showing that success to donors to ensure the longevity of the project long-term. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's talk a little bit about what the project actually is. So as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, all of our lives have been affected. But for these people, for this project, the organization saw that a drastic reduction of revenue has happened for the farmers in those communities. What they also saw was that there was a huge food shortage among the impoverished communities surrounding those farmers. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, you have to imagine that in these communities, the transportation of goods was very, very difficult. And a lot of the logistic companies weren't transporting food from those farmers to the communities that actually needed them. So the project aimed to create a value chain connecting farmers' produce to those impoverished communities, because right now nothing was being transported in between. What this project did really well was involving the community volunteers and the community leaders in all stages of the project. In the first needs assessment, analyzing that the project needed to ensure food coming from the farmers to the communities at specific times. In the planning of how to execute, how to involve the communities in the execution of this project, and in the end, also in the data collection of the project. The data collection is key to ensure the measurement of the actions and the output and the outcomes. So you can then later on present how successful or how not successful a project actually is and how to improve. So what's the result of this project having done or attempted to do the collaborative approach to the best capabilities? The project was able to run 8 soup kitchens that reached up to 30,000 plus people in the communities that are in need. It had highly involved 304 community volunteers from all around, whereas some were one-time volunteer and some were repeat volunteers. It had helped 22 farmers in rural village find regular buyers. Now this is a key thing, not one-time buyers, but continuous, as the project is going on, buyers for those farmers and ensuring them an income. raise funds up to 105,000 US dollars to execute this project. And currently the project is still going on, very successful, and they still envision to reach up to 160,000 beneficiaries soon. So we can see here the drastic difference between Project X and Project Y, having misdiagnosed the issues or not ensured the longevity, compared to this project that has attempted to enact the collaborative approach, involving the communities into the brainstorming, into the execution, and thereby ensuring the longevity of the project way after the starting organization has left the premise. So let's talk a little bit about why this project was successful in reaching its intended outcome. I think in the collaborative approach, the main message is there needs to be a holistic community involvement in all of the stages of the project, from way the beginning to all the way to the end. I'll be outlining this point in 5 different points. First point is listening to the community gave better understanding of their needs. As we talked about before, risk and needs assessment and problem assessment happening before the project even starts is key. Otherwise, you're going to misdiagnose the problem and come up with a solution that nobody needs. Point 2, leveraging the community's know-how made project execution effective and efficient. Because using local community resources and not importing resources into it shows that the project, at least to outside stakeholders, shows that the project can be efficient and effective. Point 3, shifting the ownership of execution and data collection to the community increased the quality of data and engagement. Now, this is a key point here, because if the community is involved in their own data collection and measuring their own success, they feel way more ownership over the success that they achieve, right? There is obviously a risk of malpractice and data, creating false data, but that is something that has to be mitigated within the methodology of data collection. Point 4, leveraging personal shareable stories from the community enhance donor engagement. Now, this is also very important because to outside stakeholders, especially the stakeholders that are supporting the project, they want to see not only that it's actually creating impact, but they want to see that the community that's being helped actually feel ownership and are engaged with the organization that's coming in. Last point is enhancing community skills and knowledge is a long-term investment for more impact. So what that means is that at first, trying to raise the skill bar and ensuring inside the actions of the project that there is a knowledge transfer is an investment that you're not necessarily going to see the benefits of immediately. And it might be easier not to do that. Although to ensure the longevity of the project and ensure that even after you leave, the project continues to enact positive change and create impact for the community, this step is key and a necessary investment. So I've talked a little bit about top-down. I've talked a couple examples. I've talked about bottom-up. And I've talked about the collaborative approach, and even an example how a project has effectively used the collaborative approach to create longevity and ownership for the community. Now it's time to talk a little about the implementation, and I would love to hand the mic over to my brother, Simon, to take us to the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anoa. And now I have the pleasure to share with you guys specific do's and don'ts around involving the community and the stakeholders in the specific steps of the project creation process. Now, to ensure sustainability, the community involvement needs to take place in all stages of running a project. So if we're going to simplify what running a project means, then we would just be looking at the design phase, the execution phase, and the monitoring and evaluation phase. Now, in the designing phase, what we want to do is identify the needs through stakeholder engagements. So if we are involving the community at this step, then we can co-develop relevant, sustainable solutions. At the execution step, what we want to do is involve stakeholders into the execution. So if we have community involvement at the execution step, what we can do is build community ownership over the execution step. Now, the final one, the monitoring and evaluation, arguably one of the most important steps in this project creation phase, or this project phase, is that we want participatory M&E, and we want to communicate the impact, which means that if we have community involvement, we can have two-way accountability created for this project. So, starting with the first step, the designing process in the project phase, we want to co-develop relevant and sustainable solutions. Now, facilitation of discussion by organizers can help the community realize its own needs, solutions, and goals. What we want to aim for, our do's in this situation, is that we want to facilitate the understanding of needs, the ecosystem, the sociocultural factors, so that the communities and the stakeholders can form their own hypothesis. We want to facilitate the verbalization of problems and suggested solutions. We also want to facilitate selecting or prioritizing groups within the community that need immediate support. Now, what we also want to do is to empower the community to ask for the changes they need and want. Now, if we look at all these 3 points under facilitate, and we look at the point of empowerment, we now see that we are engaging in active discussions in creating a community that is self-aware of its own needs, solutions, and goals. What we want to avoid doing here is using this community discussion to validate the outsider hypotheses. What we also want to avoid doing is to blindly create changes that are ordered from above. And finally, and most importantly, what you don't want to do is let your assumptions and biases taint your judgment when facilitating these discussions. What are ways in which you can facilitate those types of discussions? The first suggested is a semi-structured interview with leaders and key informants. Semi-structured, mostly because you need to be flexible with how you can structure your conversations. Now, you could also, if you have the ability to, do a focus group discussion with the community. Now, this is obviously makes it a little bit easier because you're not necessarily reliant on very specific leaders, key informants. You're just taking in whole focus groups from the communities themselves. What you could also do are mixed workshops with different stakeholder groups. Slightly different from the focus groups, you're actually would be workshopping specific parts of the design process and specific parts of the process for the project itself. You could also, a very popular option, go for a social resource map by the local people themselves. That gives the communities the ability and the opportunity to actually visualize the resources that they have available to themselves, to see what the actual abilities are and what the possibilities are of the project themselves that they are co-creating, co-developing, the solutions that you're bringing together based on the resources that they have. Now, you could also look at creating an institutional diagram, drawing them together with the community, again, co-creating, co-developing, slightly different process than just having a conversation. You could also go for an observation or ethnographic research. And finally, you could go for straight field questionnaires, trying to, spread out obviously the question and answering process to get different types of information from the groups themselves. So these are methods that you can use to facilitate the discussions for the first step of the project creation phase that allow you to include the community in your project creation process. So, Project Z, the Indonesian food security program that Noah had previously mentioned as a case study beforehand. This project has had success in identifying and enabling local champions to lead the way for community involvement, and have successfully included the community in the first step already in the design process. So after identifying the initial need, the organizers of Project Z worked together with the people of the communities to do a detailed need assessment and identify primary stakeholders using the methods that I discussed earlier. In this process, they involved community leaders, governmental, religious, tribe leaders, other NGOs, social projects which had been running projects in those areas, and other local champions like community nurses. Excuse me. These discussions have allowed them to define the theory of change, map other key stakeholders in the communities, define criteria for selecting or prioritizing primary stakeholders, like the community health workers decided that the elderly people, especially widows, should be the first priority. And then they also defined what the best solutions are that were needed, including when, where, and how to best implement them. An example is that the packed food should have been distributed for breakfast because people received support from other organizations for lunch and dinner already. Now, these types of understandings and insights were only able to be garnered pre-project execution because they involve these community leaders and the other NGOs and social projects that were already active and the local champions in terms of designing what was necessary and what the actual need should have been, rather than having just an assumed perception of when and how and where and what should have been done. So, how did this benefit the project? It helped the community to feel heard, respected, become more aware of what they need and the issues happening in their community. Also, the community became more confident in advocating for their needs. Because of this initial discussion, they knew, oh, we should be asking for these things. We should be looking to get these things, and also to gain new perspectives and to learn a new skill or knowledge of how they should be looking at their problem. How did it help the organizers? Well, the organizers got a better understanding of the local nuances and values, got a better understanding of communities' actual needs and challenges, and the process of designing the intervention became more efficient. Also, the solutions were more effective and were more well received by the people of the communities, which led to a much higher potential to create impact. Step 2, execution. We want to create ownership. Collaborative execution can lead to co-ownership and make the community more open to solutions. What do we do? What do we want to do when we want to create ownership? We want to empower communities to realize and utilize their knowledge and capabilities. We want to also empower the communities to confidently seek support for the resources that they need, which means that we want to make sure that these communities, as they're executing alongside with these project leaders, are actually understanding what they're doing and are actually understanding what they're contributing and where they can seek for support. Now, what we also want to be doing is to support them with our expertise and our know-how and supervise only when it's needed. So, a bit of a hands-off management solution. What we also want to be doing is to accommodate their needs. As these communities are actually executing the project alongside, they will also have additional needs that will be coming up as the project is being executed. One really interesting point is that we want to give at least partial control and decision-making power, including over resources. So something in terms of the project, whether in some kinds of examples, there should be some type of middle management roles that should be given towards these communities when they're contributing and becoming, I mean, literally having ownership. What we don't want to be doing is to bring in external resources instead of utilizing the communities. What was the point of involving all the communities and getting them self-sufficient if we're just going to keep on adding resources towards it rather than relying on what is already there? What we also don't want to be doing is taking decisions on their behalf. That would defeat the whole purpose of ownership. And also what we don't want to be doing is to design methods of execution without taking into account their skill levels or capabilities. Basically, only designing things that they can't do to begin with. That would also defeat the purpose. So, back to Project Z. Project Z managed to enable the community to utilize their knowledge and their capabilities. How did they do that? Well, they identified each stakeholder's group's knowledge and capabilities and used this knowledge to define potential roles in the intervention. So within executing their project, they had the local authority head provide kitchen space and equipment. They also had heads of community, the health facilities, ensure health adherence to the health protocols. What they also had the community health workers who knew almost every person in the community lead the day-to-day executions, whether that's recruiting volunteers, running their kitchens, cooking, packing the food. All of this is done within the capabilities of the existing community members. Now, the organizers provided expertise, know-how, a sustainable system and procedure to run big portion kitchens every day. They trained regarding the health protocols, provided the PPE, the funds to set up the kitchens, the food supplies, rewarded the volunteers for their time and effort. And after close involvement during the initial phase and trainings to improve problem solving and critical thinking in the communities, the organizers actually slowly let the community workers take the key decisions. So all in all, created an ecosystem where ownership was of the community by the community to execute for the community. How did this benefit the project? Well, the benefit for the community here was that they became more aware and more confident in their capabilities. They had recognition for their knowledge and their capabilities, and they received resources they lacked to address these challenges. They also all learned new skills and knowledge. How did this benefit the organizers? The organizer, the community resources, complemented the resources provided by the organizers, which in turn saves on effort and on cost. The solutions were accepted more readily, and the implementation was more effective, therefore. Also, it attracted more stakeholders inside and outside the community to collaborate and contribute, actually growing the project as it goes. Finally, how it helped benefited the organizers was that it created sustainability. Now the project is much easier to sustain once the initial funding is gone, because the community has already learned the new skills and received more resources. Will just be a natural process to just sustaining what the project is trying to do. So the final step in the project, the M&E. How do we create the two-way accountability? Successful implementation of a collaborative approach needs accountability from both sides. So what we want to be doing is to openly communicate the necessity of M&E and accountability with the communities. We want to co-plan the M&E, the monitoring and evaluation, including the objectives, the indicators, We also want to co-plan the information most relevant to the communities. And also we want to train the community to collect the data, to actually be the ones in charge of collecting the data, of having the valid data for the monitoring and evaluation process. What we also want to do is to complement our expertise and know-how, especially in the data analysis process. What we also want to be doing is to share the findings, not just with donors, but also with the communities themselves. Playing back what we find out, playing back what we see, and giving that information back to the communities as they are also parts of the process. What we also want to be doing is to give them a voice in the impact report, making sure that they are heard, seen, part of it, and that their stories are told. And also, finally, what we want to do, and very importantly, is to also disclose negative findings. As they are part of the M&E creation process, they should also be part of all of the findings processes. Now, what we want to avoid doing is to decide outcomes, indicators, and metrics in isolation. This is exactly speaking against what we're trying to do in co-developing these M&Es. Also, what we want to not do is to ignore the community's capabilities to collect data and monitor by bringing in our own resources or any unnecessary third parties. And finally, what we want to avoid is to use jargons and terminology that they might not understand when we are communicating these reports, and really keeping it down to simple, understandable terminology for the communities involved throughout the M&E process. So, for Project Z, when creating our participatory M&E, it enables both organizers and communities to become even more accountable. And in this case study, during the data collection and the M&E phase of the project, the stakeholders were always actively involved. The organizers, together with the communities, reviews draft of objectives, indicators, and the tools for data collection. They defined the how community workers decided the right wordings for the questions and how to ask it. Also, the community health workers, alongside with other volunteers, collected the data, recorded the data for outputs and for outcomes. And after each stage, the data was discussed with active community members, and active feedback loop was developed, reflecting on the issues faced, solutions designed, lessons learned, and celebrated all the achievements together. Over time, the community members had become much more proactive in creating the strategies and collecting the data themselves for the project, and only came to the organizers for feedback, basically creating an entire independent feedback loop given straight to the organizers, created by the communities, just by introducing them into the M&E creation process, giving them the ability to just grow beyond the means necessary. So how did this benefit Project Z? Well, for the community could leverage the results that they were seeing to attract more support. Other grassroots movements joined and wanted to contribute and came by. They could also use the reports and the learnings to have stronger evidence when they advocate for their needs in the future. Finally, it gave them much more space to speak up and share their opinions. Now, how did this benefit the organizers? Well, the report has become much more relatable to key audiences, their stakeholders. Also, it brings much more depth to the report. Also, it prevents the organization from overclaiming, because now they're actually being kept accountable to what is actually happening on the ground. Then again, they can also be used to advocate the community needs and demands higher level. And finally, the reporting has become much more accountable. The findings have become much more transparent to other key stakeholders, like the donors, and the public. So what are the things that we want to look out for? So we've collected a few challenges here that we've seen with projects that I think a lot of people will face or might face when trying to include communities into the process as we have laid it out so far. What are the common challenges that we might see is that it's difficult to prevent prejudices and assumptions from affecting one's understanding and assessment. So a few simple tips that we think are helpful are that you should stay flexible, but you should also stay very humble. Accept that you will probably not understand any of the local nuances or values, and that you probably have to go in with a blank slate. It is very important for you to listen and to facilitate the discussion with the community, or even better, to train someone from the community to facilitate these discussions for you. I would say that one should always consider it as an iterative and ongoing process. It is very important to have a continuous feedback loop throughout the entirety of the project. Now, one of the other challenges that we might face is data discrepancy. One of the key tips that we have here is that you should have a random validation check for all the data collected. Now, the very important thing with this random validation check is that you have to explain the need to the community of this random validation to make sure that they don't see it as a sign of distrust. Now, what are other challenges that we've seen? One of these challenges could be a misidentification of the local champions or of the power structure. The one way to avoid this is to make sure that in the exploration phase, to speak and to listen to people from all subsects of the community before assuming a certain type of power structure. And another challenge to look out for is that community members might not be able to see or verbalize their needs or challenges effectively, especially in the exploration phase or in the facilitation of discussion phases. And there, it's important to be able to use techniques like gamifications to make these engagements more interactive and fruitful. Now, another challenge to look out for is resistance from stakeholders to collect data for the monitoring and evaluation process. And the tips here is to make sure that it's 100% planned together before the activities are implemented, to explain or to show the benefits of M&E to help and understand the importance, and to be very flexible with the tools used to ensure that you don't just stick with one solution, but you're okay with using different types of tools if necessary. Now, the final challenge is that there could be inhibitions to give honest feedback to organizers. The most straightforward solutions we've seen in most of the projects is to keep it anonymous, because that just gives a little bit of more safety net for people to give more feedback if they're not used to giving feedback like that. So, in conclusion, we shared quite a bit with you guys today. We shared with you what the top-down approach is. We shared with you why it doesn't work, why sometimes a bottom-up approach also doesn't work, what a collaborative approach is, and how it can be useful, how we see the best ways of involving the communities in the design step, in the execution step, in the M&E step, and few tips and tricks for some of the challenges that we've been seeing some of the projects have been facing. We also shared some case studies with you guys. And before I tie up the session, I wanted to summarize a little bit what it is that we're really trying to leave you with here. And at the end of the day, when running any type of project and any type of situation, we see that if you as an organizer manage to co-develop your relevant solutions, create ownership, and create two-way accountability, you are left with a community-driven bottom-up approach that has some really strong benefits. You can get more involvement in the execution of interventions designed in the community. You can get higher self-awareness in the community of its socio-cultural factors and limitations. You can get more vocalization of the needs and demands from the communities. You can also get more participation in co-developing more solutions within the communities. And you can also have better understanding and more openness to the monitoring and evaluation, the impact reports by the communities. All these 5 things put together are benefits, core benefits of having a community-driven bottom-up approach. And one thing that I also want to highlight are secondary benefits that you get from this. This type of community approach will allow you to have self-confidence built throughout the community, as well as easy sharing of soft and hard skills throughout every single pillar that I've just mentioned. Most importantly, you will also make the community feel in complete control of their own situation, giving it a much more sustainable core to then layer other solutions on top of. So I hope that you've enjoyed our little conversation about community-driven approaches today and how to fix things from the inside. We believe that it is a method that, or at least something that should be kept in mind when designing projects where communities are involved. And we hope that it has, and we hope that it can be useful to you as well. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's session at Social Value Matters 2020. Once again, if you do have any questions for the speakers on today's session, please do ask the questions below in the box and the speakers will get back to you as soon as they possibly can. On behalf of everybody at Social Value International and Social Value Canada, I just want to thank all of the speakers for the incredible sessions that they've done today and all of you for attending. We hope that you find the rest of this week's conference as interesting as you found today, and it will see you soon at another one of the events.